Ever look at standard retirement advice and think, well, this kind of feels like a life sentence? You know the drill. Go to school, get a safe job, save a tiny fraction of your paycheck, and then just cross your fingers and pray the stock market goes up enough so you can finally stop working at age 65. But what if I told you that this exact strategy is the reason so many people are trapped working harder just to stay in the exact same place? Welcome back to Zak Wealth Files. I'm Zak, and my goal here is to make wealth building simple, accurate, and genuinely useful for you. In today's explainer, we're breaking down a mathematically verified path to financial freedom. This isn't about getting lucky. It's certainly not about inheriting a trust fund. It's about a specific, structural framework that allows everyday people to quit their jobs decades early.
See, the standard traditional approach is essentially just a massive waiting game. You're working until 65 and relying heavily on hope. The blueprint, on the other hand, is about taking immediate structural control of your finances so you can retire before you hit 40. When we really look at how early retirement is actually achieved, we have to completely strip away the emotion and just look strictly at the math. Excitement is great, but clarity is what actually builds long-term wealth. So the blueprint we are examining today replaces that blind hope with a highly specific, documented framework.
And the best part? This framework is backed by real, verifiable data. For this explainer, we're drawing on a deep analysis of 50 individuals who successfully achieved complete financial independence before the age of 40. We aren't just looking at anecdotal, lucky stories here. This analysis was based on their public financial records, detailed case studies, verified tax strategies, and their actual investment portfolios. Because when you study 50 different people who achieved the exact same extreme result, you stop seeing random chance, right? Instead, you start seeing a very clear, repeatable structural framework.
Now, this is where most people get the whole concept of early retirement completely wrong. They think achieving financial freedom means aggressively clipping coupons or crying over the cost of your morning latte. But just look at an average person's expenses. That tiny little sliver for coffee? It's absolutely nothing compared to the massive, dominant liability of housing. In the traditional financial model, housing is just a massive, depreciating liability. You buy a house in a high-cost area, you take on a 30-year mortgage, and you literally spend the next 3 decades paying interest to a bank. But those 50 individuals we studied, they completely rejected this model. They stopped viewing a house as an emotional status symbol, and they started treating it as a mathematical variable that needed to be aggressively optimized.
They neutralize this massive expense using 2 primary methods. The first is a strategy known as house hacking. Instead of buying a standard single-family home and shouldering that entire mortgage all by themselves, these folks purchased multi-family properties. The framework here is super simple. They lived in one unit and rented out the others. Because the tenants were paying the mortgage, the property taxes, and the insurance, the early retiree effectively dropped their personal housing cost to zero. They were basically living for free, all while that underlying real estate asset appreciated in value.
When you compare the two approaches side by side, the math just changes completely. Under option A, your standard single-family approach, you carry 100% of the liability. But option B, the multifamily strategy, flips the entire equation. By turning a liability into a cash-flowing asset, they structurally remove the massive financial anchor that keeps the middle class chained to their desks for 30 years. The second method they use to attack housing is extreme geo-arbitrage. They realized a pretty fundamental truth. Earning a high salary in a massive expensive city is actually a financial trap if your cost of living just consumes all of your advantages. So what did they do? They sold their expensive properties, packed up, moved to areas with a drastically lower cost of living, and bought their new homes in cash. By eliminating their mortgage payment entirely, they artificially accelerated their savings rate without even needing to earn a massive salary. Now, every explainer here on Zak Wealth Files comes with a clear next step for you to take. Your action step for Pillar 1 is to audit your current housing liability. Run the actual numbers on what your housing truly costs you annually. Then, take just 30 minutes this week to explore multifamily property viability in your current zip code, or seriously review if your current cost of living is just neutralizing your hard-earned income. Treat your housing like a math equation, not a mandatory burden.
As we just established, clipping coupons isn't going to buy your freedom. Once your housing is neutralized, you absolutely have to aggressively maximize your incoming cash flow. To do this, these early retirees completely abandon the old-school concept of the loyal employee. The verified data here is crystal clear. Staying at the same company for a decade and waiting around for a 3% annual raise is a mathematical disaster if you want to retire early. Instead, they engaged in strategic career hopping.
By changing companies every 2 to 3 years, they leveraged the open job market to force massive salary increases. They viewed their primary career not as a lifelong identity, but purely as a capital generation engine.
But they didn't just stop at their primary 9-to-5 jobs. They built highly scalable side businesses outside of those working hours. This included things like digital products, niche consulting firms, and automated e-commerce stores. Honestly, the specific business type didn't matter nearly as much as the actual structure. These businesses completely decoupled their income from their time.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is what happens when you combine that neutralized housing cost with an aggressively maximized income. It creates a massive, undeniable gap between what you earn and what you spend. Every single one of the 50 case studies we looked at maintained a massive savings rate that exceeded 50% of their income. Let me just repeat that, 50%. And honestly, in many cases, it even exceeded 70%.
But listen, a high savings rate that just sits around in cash is going to lose to inflation every time. So what did they do with that massive gap? They invested 100% of it into broad market index funds. Now, as always, it is important to remember that all investing carries risk, and past performance doesn't guarantee future results. However, historically, this is the approach they used to capture the growth of the overall market. They aggressively channeled their capital into these funds at a rate that made compound interest work in absolute overdrive. Think of compound interest like a snowball. When you are packing 50% of a high income into the market, that snowball becomes an avalanche very, very quickly.
So here is your action step for Pillar 2. I want you to calculate your exact current savings rate today. Don't guess, pull up your accounts and look at the actual numbers. Then start planning your next strategic career leap to force a salary increase, and sit down this weekend to ideate just one scalable side income stream. You have to take control and actively build your capital generation engine. This brings us to probably the biggest misconception out there. It's the question you've probably been thinking about this entire time, right, Zach? Aren't my retirement funds locked away? If I touch them before age 59 and a half, won't I face massive government penalties? And yes, it is completely true that standard retirement accounts are designed by the government to lock your money away until traditional retirement age. But those 50 individuals we studied, they didn't just accept that limitation. They bypassed this trap using highly specific, completely legal withdrawal strategies.
The most common method they used is called the Roth conversion ladder. This is a brilliant, entirely legal maneuver outlined directly right there in the tax code. Here's the step-by-step pipeline. First, they systematically moved money from traditional tax-deferred accounts into Roth accounts. Second, they paid the taxes on that converted money while they were in a lower tax bracket, which naturally happens when you retire early and your earned income drops. Third, they waited a mandatory 5-year period. And fourth, they withdrew that converted principal completely tax-free and penalty-free. Basically, they built a multi-year pipeline that gave them penalty-free access to their capital decades early.
Another alternative strategy they utilized is based on SEP, or substantially equal periodic payments. This rule allows you to access retirement funds early without the standard penalty, provided you take a specific, mathematically calculated amount every single year based on your life expectancy. Now remember, individual tax situations are super complex, and you should always run these specific conversions through a licensed tax professional or financial advisor. But from a general education standpoint, the takeaway here is clear. These individuals specifically structured their accounts to ensure they had a legal bridge to their capital decades before traditional retirement age.
So your final action step for today is to review your current investment structures. Log into your brokerage and retirement accounts and map out exactly what percentage of your wealth is sitting in traditional tax-deferred buckets versus Roth after-tax buckets. Because you can't build an access bridge if you don't even know what materials you currently have to work with.
We've seen the verifiable data from 50 people who retired before 40. They structurally eliminated their largest liability, they aggressively maximized their income to push their savings rate to extreme levels, and they built a legal bridge to access their capital early. The blueprint is verified, the math is undeniable. Really, the only variable left here is your willingness to execute. So the real question isn't whether you can retire early, it's what you're going to do with your life once you buy all your time back. If this explainer brought you some clarity today, make sure to subscribe to Zak Wealth Files so you don't miss our next breakdown. I'll see you in the next one.